People say there's a certain tailor's shop hidden deep within Singapore, a place where time itself feels rearranged. They whisper of garments offering more than warmth, stitched from materials no earthly loom could ever weave. No one knows why it appeared, only that shadows inside seem to stretch impossibly, clinging to existence long after their source has faded. The man had only recently arrived in the bustling city, his mind focused on new beginnings. He'd heard the whispers, dismissed them as local folklore, yet an odd sensation began to plague him. At first it was just a faint peripheral shimmer, a fleeting blur at the edge of his vision. He'd rub his eyes, attributing it to fatigue or the humid air, but it persisted, a brief, static-like flicker, like an old television struggling for a signal would appear and vanish. It happened whenever he looked away from something quickly, or when his gaze drifted casually across the vibrant streets of Singapore. A quick, gray-white buzz at the corner of his sight, but then the flickers grew more defined, lasting a fraction of a second longer. They began to carry a subtle hum, an almost electric prickle just behind his eyes. The world at the edges of his perception now seemed to fray, momentarily dissolving into a silent, shimmering interference that was undeniably there, even if his brain insisted it wasn't. The observer had initially dismissed the way light seemed to ripple around the tailor's shop, like heat rising from pavement. He told himself it was just an optical illusion, the Singapore humidity playing tricks on his eyes. But then he noticed the back door, usually bolted, now standing slightly ajar, leading into what should have been nothing more than a storage room. Curiosity, a dangerous thing, pulled him closer. He pushed the door open to an empty, dusty space. At first, there was only silence, then a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. It was a voice he knew, a voice from his past, calling out. He froze. The room was empty. He searched, frantically, his eyes darting into every shadowed corner, behind every phantom shelf. Nothing. But then it came again, clearer this time, from the very center of the vacant room. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. It felt like a memory, ripped from time and given breath, twisting his senses. He wasn't sure. The man felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Singapore humidity. He remembered it clearly, a conversation just yesterday with his colleague, about a crucial deadline for their project. He brought it up, expecting immediate agreement, perhaps even a shared sigh of relief. But his colleague just stared, a blank look of confusion on his face. "What are you talking about?" his colleague asked, a slight edge of concern in his voice. "We never discussed that. Not yesterday. Not ever," the man insisted, describing the exact words, the nervous laugh they'd shared, the precise moment by the coffee machine. But his colleague only shook his head, a growing worry etching itself onto his features. "Are you feeling all right?" That was strange enough, this complete mismatch of recollection. But then things got worse. The man found himself looking at his own office, a place he'd worked for years, and feeling a sudden, profound sense of unfamiliarity. The stack of papers on his desk, usually so neat, was in disarray. The chipped mug by not wrong exactly, but like they belonged to someone else, or perhaps had always been like this, and he was only now seeing it. He felt a shiver, a cold dread that this wasn't just a memory lapse. It was something far more insidious, like the world itself was being re-stitched around him, one thread at a time. He was forgetting things that had truly happened, and remembering things that hadn't, and the world around him, once so solid, seemed to be shifting with his mind, its edges blurring into an unsettling dream. The wearer tried to ignore the growing dread, focusing on routine. They walked towards the kitchen, a path they knew intimately. Every step was usually automatic, but tonight it felt like wading through thick water. The air grew heavy, pressing in on all sides. As they reached for the doorknob, something shifted. The handle, familiar and worn, felt strangely cold. When they pushed it open, the kitchen wasn't there. Instead, a vast echoing darkness stretched before them. It wasn't just a shadow, it was an emptiness that swallowed light. The known doorway led into a space that couldn't exist. There was no smell of old spices, no hum of the refrigerator, only the chilling silence of nowhere. The wearer quickly slammed the door shut, heart pounding. They tried again, ripping it open. This time the hallway was back, but it was subtly different. The floorboards seemed to curve inwards, the walls closer than before. A silent pressure built around them, tightening its grip. The world was shrinking, folding in on itself. The subtle tremors had grown, no longer just a feeling beneath the skin, but something vast and external. The wearer knew he had to confront it. He walked to the window, the one overlooking his usual mundane view of the city. He saw the familiar street, the apartment blocks, the endless stream of cars below. He took a deep breath, trying to anchor himself in the ordinary. But as he stared, something changed. It wasn't gradual. It was like a sudden tear, a ripple in the fabric of what should have been. The sky, once a hazy Singapore blue, deepened, bleeding into an unnatural, pulsating indigo. Stars, sharp and brilliant, bloomed into existence, impossibly visible in broad daylight. The apartment blocks across the way began to stretch, their concrete facades twisting, reforming into strange, ancient spires that clawed at the alien sky. The wearer blinked, then pressed his palms against the cool glass. He needed to verify this. Was it a trick of the light, a sudden fatigue, playing games with his mind? The street below was no longer asphalt, but a churning, reflective blackness, like polished obsidian. No cars, no people, just the silent, breathing void. It was as if his entire existence was now a solitary island, adrift in a sea of impossible, shifting realities. What was outside, and more terrifyingly, what was happening to the world he thought he knew? The shadows seemed to coil thicker now, clinging to the edges of the room where the wearer stood, as if the darkness itself had gained weight and purpose. The air grew cold, then inexplicably warm, shifting with an unnatural rhythm that pressed against their skin, feeling less like a draft and more like a vast, unseen presence breathing. Objects in the room, previously distinct, began to blur at their edges, their forms wavering as if seen through rising heat. This was not merely strange, it was an assault on their perception, designed to unravel the very foundation of their senses. Then, a sound unlike any other. It didn't originate from a specific point, but permeated the space. A whisper that began as a faint hum, sharpening into a high-pitched whine that resonated deep within their skull, making their teeth ache. Suddenly, an impossibly familiar voice, soft yet piercing, cut through the growing din. It was the voice of their mother, long gone, whispering their childhood nickname. "Why are you hiding, my love?" The wearer clutched the strange, dark fabric they wore, their mind racing. How could it know? How could it speak with such perfect, horrifying familiarity, addressing them directly, intimately? A long-forgotten perfume, specific to that beloved memory, materialized in the air, thick and cloying, overwhelming their senses. "There's no escape," the voice murmured, now overlaid with a low static, an electronic crackle beneath the tender words. "You can't hide from me." The shadows on the walls twisted, seeming to coalesce, forming shapes that weren't quite human, yet felt undeniably watchful. The strange feeling wasn't new, not entirely. At first it was just subtle skips in conversations or odd moments of déjà vu. But then things got worse, much worse. One moment, the wearer would be walking down a familiar street in the midday sun, traffic buzzing. The next blink, the same street lay deserted, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of ancient streetlights, cars replaced by models decades old, or sometimes no cars at all, just horse-drawn carts silently passing. The very air would shift, tasting of dust and time. It wasn't just losing track of time anymore. It felt like time itself was losing track of the wearer. Their desperate attempts to cling to a single, fixed present were futile. A familiar building might suddenly crumble before their eyes, then just as quickly stand pristine and new again. Scaffolding appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Faces in the crowd would age or de-age in the blink of an eye. The whispers started then, faint and fragmented, like echoes from 1,000 different moments at once, each display. It was as if a hidden hand was flipping pages of a calendar at random, pulling them apart from the constant flow of reality itself. The man's struggle against the unseen force escalated, transforming his living space into a cruel game. At first it was simple misplacement, keys vanishing from his pocket, only to reappear inside a book he hadn't opened in years. His phone, a crucial tether, once materialized in a locked drawer he didn't even own. He began to meticulously organize, to fight the creeping chaos. But it was futile. A framed photograph of his younger self, a precious memory, appeared face down in a bowl of stale cereal, the glass already cracked. That was strange enough. But then things got worse. The displacement became more deliberate, more malicious. Important documents, once neatly stacked, would be found shredded or folded precisely and tucked into his mail slot, addressed to a name he didn't recognize. It felt like a malevolent hand played a cruel trick. The environment itself seemed to protest, losing cohesion. Walls shimmered with faint, unsettling patterns. Dust, thick and gray, settled in impossible. His world was not just unraveling, it felt actively conspiring. Each displaced object, a cold, calculated warning of the inescapable fate he had tried so hard to hide from. The wearer, desperate for some anchor, some proof of their own skin and bone, found themselves before a dusty, ornate mirror. They stared intently, trying to pierce through the shifting shadows that seemed to cling to every surface in the room. At first, the reflection seemed normal enough. A figure stood there, draped in the strange fabric, their eyes wide with fear. But then, as the wearer leaned closer, a subtle wrongness began to seep in. A chilling silence descended. The reflection wasn't quite right. The eyes, once their own, became vast empty caverns, devoid of any spark. The features flattened, losing all definition, as if erased by an unseen hand. It was a face, yes, but one without history, without memory, a blank slate where a person used to be. And behind that vacant image, the room in the reflection wasn't the dusty shop anymore. It was a swirling, formless void, a deep, silent abyss that swallowed all light, all sound. The boundaries between the real and the reflected world began to blur. They reached out, not quite sure if they were touching the glass, or something else entirely. No one knows what they truly saw in that final, terrifying moment. But whatever it was, it left no room for doubt about who they were becoming, or rather, who they weren't. The light in the subject's eyes, once a desperate flicker, finally died. It wasn't a sudden extinguishment, but a slow, chilling ebb, like a tide pulling back from a barren shore, leaving nothing but damp, cold sand. No one knows why the Tailor chooses certain souls, or what truly happens to the parts they take. But for the subject, the battle was undeniably over. At first, their movements had been hesitant and fearful, but now they were perfectly fluid, almost rehearsed. There was an unnerving precision in every gesture, a detached elegance that spoke of complete control, though certainly not by the subject itself. An invisible hand guided their head to turn, their gaze to linger on mundane objects, a crack in the pavement, a shadow on a wall. As if seeing them for the very first time, every texture and shade rendered with profound, quiet interest. The terror was gone, replaced by an absolute, vacant stillness that permeated their very being. The subject had become an empty frame. Its thoughts, its dreams, its very essence had been carefully unraveled, absorbed into the dark weave of the fabric, until only a perfect silence remained within. The world was no longer seen by the subject, but chillingly and intricately, through it, a pristine window for an unblinking gaze.